phrase white Christian nationalism has been in the headlines quite a bit recently, but what does it really mean? Laura Moran-Lopez recently spoke to one expert to better understand the concept.
Talk about white Christian nationalism. It's one of the greatest threats to our country, our rights, and our
Christianity has primed millions of Americans to not just accept the rise of fascism in this country, but to openly embrace it, whether they realize it or not.
Is there room in a Christian, biblically driven society, a Christian nationalist society, for Muslims, Hindus, and people who are Christians? Yes, but not room for a ton of them.
Hey, welcome to this episode of The Soul Trap. We're excited to have you join us today because I believe we're going to have a very important, vital, necessary conversation. And I think it's one that's going to spark some thoughtfulness, maybe even some disagreement. But what we're looking for is truth. We're looking for balance in a clearly unbalanced world. The assassination of Charlie Kirk brought to the forefront several different things that we deal with here at the Soul Trap. One of them is obviously the conspiratorial side of Charlie Kirk, something that we're going to be getting into in the episodes ahead. Was it a single shooter? Were there multiple shooters? What was the direction? What were the results? Who could have done it? Who could have pulled it off? And of course, the $64,000 question would be, why? Those are all legitimate questions. Some things easy to debunk, some things easy to prove, but some questions still remain out there. Well, his assassination brought that to light. And if anything, it reminded us that there is a deep-seated national distrust of our government, and honestly, frankly, rightfully so. But it also brought something else. The Charlie Kirk assassination, we all unified in a matter of 48 hours. But the Charlie Kirk memorial, well, that brought disunity. In a sense, it has been, in my lifetime, I don't know that I've ever seen something as powerful on the surface as that memorial service. Even 9/11 had sort of a restraint from it just a little bit because we were dealing with, at the time, still trying to be somewhat sensitive to Islam and all of those different things like this. But that memorial, there was no sensitivity. It was out and out, on the surface, profoundly Christian. And maybe a better way of saying it is profoundly Christian nationalism, something we'll get to in just a moment. And then, of course, there was the great moment. Whether you thought it was real or not, scripted or sincere, the moment that Erica Kirk, the recently widowed wife of the young man who was assassinated, stood up and said, "I forgive him."
I forgive him.
What an amazing and powerful juxtaposition that created between the world, between those that hated Charlie Kirk, that laughed and scoffed at his assassination, and what we claim to be Christian. It was, in a lot of ways, very powerful, very Christian, but here's where the division comes in. It was also a great deal of heresy, a great deal of false gospel. It was not either or, it was both and. In some ways, there were great presentations of the gospel. And I hate to say this, but better presentations than some of our preachers give today. At the same time, there was an obvious flavor, if not outright coloring, of Catholicism. And it has begun to spark a real debate between what it means to be a Christian and a nationalist, and to be a Christian nationalist. What it means to be involved in politics and to be political. What is the line that Christians are to draw? How are we to be in the world, but not of the world? This is an age-old battle that has been raging, and something that seems to come up from time to time. It's not new. Francis Schaeffer, Martin Lloyd-Jones, Ian Murray, Ian Paisley. You can go all the way back to the time of Augustine and the early church fathers. To what degree do we use whatever influence we have to better our society, to better our culture? Is there a danger in trying to better our culture that our culture actually robs Christianity of its distinction? In other words, there's a lot of things that go along and go into this mixture. One of the things, though, I was recently talking with a friend, a gentleman we're going to have on the show here in just a moment, and we were talking using two different words. I'm not going to tell you what his phrase was, but I'm going to tell you what I told him. One of the concerns that I have is that I am noticing what I have termed a detached dispensationalist. Not a hyper-dispensationalist, though I think that's a possibility of that phrase theologically. But I'm talking about a detached dispensationalist. Because our dispensational belief in the future is so strong, I think it has the proclivity of detaching us from being involved in the now. And that is always a tension that we as Christians have to deal with. The rapture could happen tomorrow, but it could not. Do you sell everything you have and prepare for a rapture that may or may not happen tomorrow? Or do you find balance and nuance? And how do we get involved in these decision-making processes that are taking place? For instance, on one hand, I think Donald Trump was clearly a better choice for our country than Kamala Harris. But he's certainly far from being a Bible-believing Christian. We are seeking to gain balance in an unbalanced world, and that is not easy. As a Christian, we are both a nationalist, a citizen of this country, and we also are a citizen of heaven. Now, with all of that there, now you add in a new doctrine that really has come to the fruition within just the last couple decades. I don't know that it's a new doctrine, but it's an old doctrine clothed in American citizenship. It is the Seven Mountains Doctrine, also called the Seven Mountain Mandate. The Seven Mountain Mandate is a theology and strategy within certain charismatic and evangelical Christian movements. It teaches that Christians are called to bring God's kingdom to earth by influencing and taking control of 7 key areas. Now, I want you to remember that little phrase. It is a teaching that Christians are to bring God's kingdom to earth. Now, as dispensationalists, we understand right off the bat that ticks the box of incorrect doctrine. We do not bring God's kingdom to earth in this dispensation, but they believe that they are, and the way they go about that is influencing what they call the 7 mountains of influence: religion, family, education, government, media, arts and entertainment, and business. The idea was popularized in the early 2000s by Christian leaders like Lance Volano and Bill Bright, who is the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ. There's also Lauren Cunningham, founder of Youth with a Mission. They claim that God, quote unquote, revealed to them that Christians must reclaim the 7 areas to shape culture according to biblical values. Now, I dismiss that outright. I am a cessationist with certain caveats. I am a dispensationalist, and I just don't believe that. But their goals, in a way, I can understand. Now, the belief that they have is rooted in dominion theology, which holds that Christians are to, quote unquote, take dominion of the earth. Supporters argue that by gaining influence in these sectors, Christians can, quote unquote, transform society for God and prepare the world for Christ. Critics say it promotes a form of theocracy or Christian nationalism and blurs the line between church and state. Now, obviously, we would disagree with this. But the question is, and what we're going to be discussing today is there room between that extreme and the extreme of sticking your head in the sand and waiting until Jesus comes? Is there room for the needle to move? Is there room for a believer to desire to have influence in one of these spheres that they just mentioned? For the cause of Christ, yes, we want to reach souls, but for the betterment of the culture. And is a freer culture in the long run better for the gospel? We find that where there are blue states, there's less freedom of the gospel. Red states, statistically proven, have more freedom for the gospel. Is it a bad thing? Is it either or? Do we want to be salt and light? And what does that actually look like? And how do we apply that? Is it necessarily wrong to be involved in particular areas of government, politics, culture, and to leverage that for the gospel and, may I simply say, for a safer society. The question is a nuanced question, but I think it's important because we're going to need to know how to draw distinct lines. Wouldn't we want a Christian influence in our government? Is that wrong? And don't we seek that by trying to get the right judges into office? Don't we wish that we could have gone back to 1974 Roe v. Wade and have had the right judges, Christian judges, or at least judges that feared the moral, righteous law of God? That would have saved probably tens of millions of innocent lives. We want wholesome programming. Do we have to be afraid of watching the Super Bowl halftime show? Is it wrong to say that pornography sites should be outlawed? Do we want the Ten Commandments and prayer back in school? I know many Baptist preachers, and I'm one of them, that have jumped up and down and said when we kicked God out of school, and that's when everything started going downhill. Okay, well, how do we get him back in? Should we get him back in? Is it a bad thing? So the point I'm driving at here is that while we're taking Christian nationalism and running it to the extreme, I think we're going to have to be able to nuance this to make sure that we're not running to the other extreme. Nationalism is a dangerous issue, but I submit to you that possibly a detached dispensationalism is equally. And I think horizontal righteousness is the responsibility and the stewardship of all Christians, if I can frame that word that way. So obviously there's a lot going on in this conversation and a lot to talk about, and I believe we're going to face this more and more, and we need to have it right. We need to at least be able to know what we're talking about as we're speaking. Well, I just mentioned the friend that I started having this conversation with. He's no stranger to the Soul Trap. We've talked about everything from COVID to aliens and to a lot of stuff, both on and off the air, but we're very glad to have Randy Keener with us, pastor for 3.5 years, evangelist for 10 years. He is the co-founder and teaching professor and instructor at Asheville Baptist Institute. Bro, I just loaded us up with a lot. I hope you're ready for a long podcast. Welcome to the Soul Trap Political Christian Nationalism Edition. We're glad to have you on board.
Oh, good to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it is wonderful. And, I said the other day when you and I were talking, texting back and forth, and I didn't mean it as a joke. There's a few people in life that I'll reach out to and kind of throw some things out. And I kind of hope that I don't get rebuked when it comes back. And you're one of them. And I threw some of these ideas out at you. I was kind of just cringing, like, man, I hope I'm not off the reservation here. And we started having this conversation. And I was like, okay. Then I'm not totally crazy. So here's what we want to get into. There's just so much to pick apart. But I think let's start with the Charlie Kirk. Let's just start with the Charlie Kirk Memorial. Now, Matt Crane, to cite and to do due diligence, has a great concept called vertical, inverted, and horizontal. And what he says is that, in essence, some things are just purely vertical. It's right, it's wrong, it's crystal clear. There's no doubt about it. Some things are perfectly right. Some things are exactly wrong. Worship the Lord thy God. There's no question about it. It is what it is. Thou shalt not kill. It is. But then there is that horizontal area where there can be a mixture of good and bad. And a perfect example would be the Christian himself. You are a new creature, and yet Paul said, in me dwelleth no good thing. I am a saved child of God. At the same time, when I would do good, evil is present with me. So at your finest point as a Christian, you're always going to have the presence of some negative. At your worst point as a Christian, if you're truly saved, you're always going to have some that is positive. Now, that's maybe a simplistic illustration of what he's talking about, but life is not always either or. Spurgeon was a great preacher. He was also a 5-point Calvinist. Spurgeon was a great evangelist. He also did not believe in the rapture. Do we wad Spurgeon up and throw him away? And how much do we live with? Do we stand side by side with a Catholic priest who's anti-abortion and pro-freedom, but wrong on the gospel? Blatantly so. So let's start with the Charlie Kirk Memorial and let's begin to work our way into this nest of confusion. How do we process something like the Charlie Kirk Memorial where we've got, man, on the surface, a lot of good, and then at the same time, when you pick at it a little bit, you go, and that's a lot of not good. I'm going to kind of give you the floor and let you run with it for a while.
Sure, sure. Well, to reference Spurgeon, he had a quote about discernment, and he said that discernment is not the ability to determine right and wrong, but right and almost right. And so I do think that kind of factors in somewhat here, in the sense that there was some great things. Now, I saw edited clips of Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
I didn't see the full thing, so if he went off the rails after what I saw, I don't claim credit for that. But what I saw, Marco Rubio, a Roman Catholic, gave a precise presentation of the Lord Jesus Christ,
Yes.
which I was actually shocked because I know of his Catholic background.
Uh-huh.
So, hearing him say something like that, somebody could have heard what he said, believed it, and gotten saved.
Right.
So you did have the good, and I don't think the answer is necessarily taking the good out of the spotlight for the sake of beating everybody down, but there has to be a recognition that all the other pieces, especially within the confines of our churches, I'll say that,
Uh-huh.
because
Uh-huh.
that's where we deal with doctrine. That's where we deal with the edification of the body,
Okay.
and we can be more nuanced in our churches.
Okay.
Some of the places where we've taken the fight to, it's harder to be nuanced. It's harder to have conversation, like Facebook. It's just a hard
Hmm.
place to have a nuanced conversation without
Is it
somebody
even the
thinking
right
that you're
place to have?
attacking.
Yeah. Right.
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 Nobody can offer a different opinion without you feeling personally attacked.
Hmm.
And I've been there, because there's no tone, there's no context really, other than just what they're inserting into the conversation.
Yeah.
So I do think that within the confines of church, that's probably a fantastic place to explain to our people, especially to our young people who
Hmm.
are really moved right now by what's taking place. Some of the more nuanced pieces that, man, the gospel was preached. That's wonderful. But at the same time, don't be swept up into some of the heresy and ecumenicalism that is going to follow.
Yeah. So, okay, that comes down to maybe the big C and little c, the big church, little church. In other words, I would think you can make a case that you would, well, before we get into that, let's stay where we are.
Okay.
I think that's very, very profound because what's happening is this is different because somebody brought this up. Well, what about the Ashbury thing? The Asbury thing. Well, there was no gospel in that. There was
Right.
people standing around just singing. I mean, you never heard any kind of gospel. This is a situation where, whether he's Catholic or not, you heard clear presentations of the gospel. And it wasn't just Rubio, there were others. They were
Yes.
giving clear presentation. At the same time, there was a lot of nonsense. I've been using the term axe versus a scalpel. And I feel like that there is this tendency to, like, if is this tendency that I use the illustration like if you have a problem with your arm, maybe there's a cancer spot on your arm, skin cancer, and you go to the doctor and it's a little spot there, and you show up and he says, well, we're going to have to chop your arm off. And you think, man, that's kind of aggressive. If it's going to destroy the whole body, maybe, but can we try the scalpel approach first? And I'm wondering if we're so scared, that we don't go, that's fine. We can accept the good, the wrong we can deal with in our churches, but we have to, man, no, compromise isn't the word, but you have to navigate through what's going on. You can't just get on Facebook and post stuff on there as if, that this was absolutely a satanic event that took place.
Right. Well, I'll tell you some of what I've seen personally as not fallout, but feedback, I guess would be better term from this, is there's a lot of people who have started seeking as a result. of Charlie Kirk's life.
Yes.
For better or worse, for whatever he believed that was right versus wrong, for all of that, there are people now who are invested in trying to figure this thing out.
Yes.
And unfortunately, what I've seen kind of as the draw to a lot of these people, because they've been posting it on X, primarily is where I would see it. They were pulling up to the mega churches. They were pulling up to the Roman Catholic churches. Um, they're seeking after that kind of stuff because they don't know better.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But flip side, I've got personal friends that people showed up at their church the following Sunday morning.
Yeah.
A friend of mine in Asheville, he had a guy show up on the Sunday morning after the assassination and got saved that morning.
Mm.
So, I mean, I do fear that Baptists, especially, we almost turn away from the opportunities that God provides to us.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a podcast once on Baptist boogeymen because literally everything that falls in our lap as opportunities, we have to
Uh-huh.
spend 20 years trying to suss out if it's really an opportunity or not.
Right. Right.
It's like
Yeah.
the U
Yes.
scan at Walmart. The U scan for years was the
Hmm.
tool of the Antichrist so that you could scan your hand before you bought your groceries.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
and maybe the Antichrist will use that, but come to find out, it's just a piece of technology to scan your groceries.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. There's a lot of truth to that. And I mean, we've seen that. One of the things I've seen is the younger generation, and I'm talking about mid 20s, maybe early 30s, 20s, and then the teens, were deeply moved by this. Now, that all in of itself, that's a whole nother conversation to have because they are very averse right now to anything conspiratorial.
Mhm.
And Kevin, who's off screen right now, our producer, but he and I were talking the other day, and we think that one of the reasons why that is because the conspiracy has become like a comic book to them. There's so much that it's just like whatever. It's WWE to them. So that's a whole other conversation. But I agree with you. We've seen that at our church. I'm hearing that in reports around that there is a tremendous, and the truth of the matter is Charlie Kirk, for all of his flaws, and this is what I said to somebody the other day, I don't get my theology from Charlie Kirk. He was wrong in some areas. He was a political creature. There's no way to get around that. But I'm going to tell you what, I think that America could use about another 10,000 of those kind of guys. Easy, So that becomes the challenge, I think, is being able to navigate that. I'm going to be honest with you. I wonder sometimes if it's not, and I'm getting narrow, but I wonder if it's not maybe a little bit of an envy on our part because, we have the truth. We believe we have a monopoly on the truth. And we do. I believe in dispensationalism. I believe in the King James Bible. But it's almost like we're mad if somebody gets saved, but they don't end up in a dispensational King James Bible church. And again, I know there's going to be some people going to be emailing and making comments and this and that. But man, if the only people getting saved are independent, fundamental, Bible believing, King James only church, man, it's a bad day. So, we have to be able to hold tension. We talked about that offline, you and I. You came up with a phrase. I threw out the phrase to you, detached dispensationalism. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to pick apart every nuance of the Bible. I'm going to stand on the corner, preach at people as they go by, but I don't want to be involved in any social activity. I don't want to be involved in any civil activity, government, because it's all going to hell in a handbasket. Nothing can break check it. You came up with a different phrase, and I'm not going to use that. I'll let you bring it out, but actually brought a Bible passage into that. Talk to us a little bit about that phrase and that passage you were talking about.
Sure. Well, where it started for me was dialectical discernment. And I took it a step farther, but starting there, that's where I realized we needed to begin. Dialectical thinking just means that you can hold two truths in tension.
Okay.
And the Charlie Kirk Memorial is a fantastic example of that, because I can look at that memorial and see that the gospel was preached and say, praise the Lord, the gospel was preached. People could hear that and get saved. Also, the truth I'm holding in tension is that there was some foolishness that's associated with it, such as the Catholicism, postmillennialism, um, getting pulled into the spotlight now. Along with that is replacement theology, and all those things are kind of trying to ride the coattails
Right,
of
right.
the Charlie Kirk Memorial. And the topic of dialectical discernment, I think we can illustrate biblically in Philippians 1 when Paul speaks about those who would preach Christ to add to his bonds, to add to his suffering,
So
but Christ is preached.
let's not be in a hurry. Let's take a look at that. Do you mind if
Okay.
we take a look at that?
Yeah,
Let's
sure.
go there and just have you read that passage, and then I'm just going to have you explain what we're reading, whether you're listening to it or you're watching it, so that we're not coming up with I know we're going to get hit with that's a private interpretation, but what is Paul saying? Because the reason I'm saying this, brother, is because, if you slow down and read what he's saying, it's it's very disconcerting to those of us that view the world as that there is no gray area. You're either right, or you're either 100% right or 100% wrong. And if you read it to me at face value, it kind of challenges that assumption a little bit. Walk us through how you would teach this at the Institute, and what your take would be on it.
Sure. So it's Philippians chapter 1, verse 15. It says, some indeed preach Christ, even of envy and strife, and some also of goodwill. The one preached Christ of contention, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my bonds. Now, stopping there, the whole concept of dialectical thinking or dialectical discernment, as we're viewing it from this passage, is that there is a negative, and Paul wasn't afraid to call out the negative.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my concern with issues like this, because you got guys on both sides that all they can see is the negative,
Mm-hmm.
but then you do have guys on the other side that all they can see is the positive.
Yes, yes.
Paul wasn't afraid to deal with the negative aspects of this situation and call them out. So that's what he does in the first two verses we read. Verse
Mm-hmm.
17, but the other of love, knowing that I am set for the defense of the gospel. So up till this point, this is the dialectical portion of this passage. It shows both the negative and the positive and holds these two truths in tension. But here's the discernment piece. Verse number 18. What then, notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice.
Mm.
Discernment allows us to take those two truths that are in tension and find a pathway on how to navigate them properly. And when Paul does that, he comes out at the pinnacle of that being Christ has been preached.
Okay, so it really does come back to that there is always going to be, let me bring it down, low-hanging fruit. You and I both know, and I'm not going to call the name because it would I don't want to muddy the water of the discussion, but we both know a preacher in the past, within the 20th century, arguably one of the greatest Bible teachers, King James Bible teachers out there, if not in the 20th century. Tremendous Bible teacher. At the same time, there was a spirit that was at times caustic, unnecessarily sarcastic, unnecessarily, I don't want to say violent, but just aggressive. Good, yes. Bad, yes, in both. Right? So what do we do with that? And I think what you're getting at here is that as a Christian, it is biblical maturity to be able to not necessarily accept it, but to hold both in tension. That
Yes.
yes, there was a presentation of the gospel, and yes, there was some non. how do we navigate that from there?
Well, let me bring up this verse. This wasn't in my notes, but now that you mention this,
Yeah.
Hebrews 5:14. It says, "But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." One of the hallmarks of somebody who can suss out strong meat from the scriptures is that they have an ability to discern.
Uh-huh.
And so, it's interesting how many armchair scholars that we have that are going to constantly exhort their knowledge of the strong meat of the Word of God, but they.
Uh-oh.
We apologize for the inconvenience, but we appear to be having technical difficulties.
So we have so many armchair theologians that would express their knowledge of the Scripture, but yet they can't take sometimes Scripture themselves, but even events which we should be applying the Scripture to for our daily lives,
Mm-hmm.
and navigate through them with a discerning spirit.
So I used that this past Sunday night on a series that we did. What's interesting to me about that verse is that it says, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised, not to discern, it doesn't say to discern either good or evil, but to discern both good and evil. In other words, it's
Yes.
almost like it's going to be there. You're going to see it. You're going to be able to look and see there's good and evil, and you need to be able to discern that. It's not an either or. Sometimes it is, there's both there. I have to discern that. And for me, to go back to that illustration of that pastor, the good far outweighed the evil. Now, that's where it comes in, is being able to discern that in that realm. I think that's true. So now that brings us into the question of, as we move forward, and man, you and I have talked about this since 2020, the summer of 2020 on. You have written a book. Tell me the title of the book about the government and the Christian. We talked about that.
Oh, yeah. Children of Obedience.
Children of Obedience.
Yeah.
And they can get that on Amazon, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. If you don't get that, if you haven't gotten that, you guys need to get that. If I was a pastor, I would get that for all of my men in the church. It's worth it. So we've been talking about this for a long time. Where does the Christian fall? Now, here's the challenge that I want to get into. In 2020-ish, we were debating on where the Christian falls in response to the government. I feel pretty clear, about the way we navigated through that. But now here's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Where does the Christian fall, not in reactivity, but in proactivity? Because we're seeing Christian nationalism. And as I said, I think that's quickly becoming a catch-all word. I think that there is a distinct stream of Christian nationalism based upon a dominion theory, postmillennialism. But I am a nationalist. I do believe in the freedoms of America, all that, and I am a Christian. So does that make me a Christian nationalist? So where does the Christian fall in line with what's going on? And can we make a case, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I just want you to pick what you want. Can we make a case that says, listen, we're not going to ignore the gospel, but we can't ignore the fact either that it's better to share the gospel in someone's home than to share the gospel in a prison cell. Freedom is a friend of the gospel. So I've thrown a lot your way, but what do you think about the proactivity decisions we have to make now as Christians?
So as far as anything that we would do, and I actually addressed this in the book about advocating for freedom, for the freedom of all people, and that is a Baptist distinctive. We want to extend the liberty of conscience to all men, and so that is a very distinct truth for us. So as far as my involvement in politics, I'm speaking for myself personally. I'm not a political activist. I am a preacher of the gospel and a preacher of righteousness.
Uh-huh.
And because of those two things, I'm being involved more in political discussions now, maybe than I've ever been.
Okay, hold your
Um,
thought right there. Hold your thought right there.
okay.
We can see, we can hear you, but we can't see you now. I'm telling you, man, the devil doesn't want this one going out. That's for sure.
Well, I think this is probably closer to where spiritual warfare resides.
I would agree. I would agree. Okay, I've got the thought.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick up right. So, you ready? Here we go. So here's the question. We're talking about preachers and politics. And everyone's like, "Hey, you got to stay out of politics." Growing up from my stream, the anathema was Jerry Falwell. He was a
Mhm.
compromiser. He was low down. He was dirty. He was, why? Because he got involved in politics. Yada yada yada. But as I get older, I don't know so much. I'm not saying that I disagree with Jerry Falwell completely. But when Lester Roloff, and if you don't know these names, you should do some research. When Lester Roloff needed help, he needed a lot of political help.
Mhm.
You know, um, I, where do we draw the line? I mean, I think church-wise, institutionally, I don't think the church should be involved in the state. But is it wrong to have Christians grounded in a local church going out and being lawyers, being doctors, being city councilors, being commissioners, being governors? I mean, it was better to have Marco Rubio, a Catholic that believed in somewhat of the righteousness of the law, versus that one up in Michigan. I forget what her name is. So where do we draw the line on these kind of things, and how do we navigate our way through it?
Sure. Well, I remember two separate occasions. One was 2012. I don't remember the exact year of the other one, but we had some issues here in Buncombe County, a very liberal county because of Asheville. The county itself has been traditionally conservative, but Asheville, they've always done their liberal stuff. And I remember they were extending same sex benefits to folks in the city. I went and I spoke against it. Now, I spoke against it in the church I pastored, but I knew for anything I said beyond there to have some teeth, I had to go to where they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the county commissioners meeting and I stood up and spoke there. From the outside, people would probably look at that as political activism. No, I'm a preacher of the gospel, a preacher of righteousness. I don't want that stuff in my community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Same thing when they had the bathroom bill, as it's becoming known from North Carolina, where essentially men with mental disorders were allowed to go into women's restrooms.
Uh-huh.
And when this thing was defeated, Buncombe County was putting out a proclamation against that, saying that it was sexist and wrong and transphobic, homophobic. Well, they had a county meeting. So I go to the county meeting because I want there to be a voice there for the gospel and for righteousness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that that's true, and I think the flip side of that is it would be nice if there were Christians sitting on that bar that would have responded.
Yes. Well, and the unfortunate truth is there was one man who was um, Christian. He was from an independent Baptist church in the area, gave lip service to Christianity. He would go around to churches to try and raise votes and stuff like that. And he got
Mm-hmm.
voted in, and he was one of the weakest voices on the council. So that's the shame. But if we can get people who are willing to stand for truth and righteousness and not worry about the next election, that's what we really could have used his help for, is
Yeah,
just to give us a little bit more of a voice
yeah.
in the council.
So historically, what has been the Bible believer, the Baptist position when we go back? I mean, you've got, I've got in front of me right now different notes. Different men have fallen on different sides. You've got some that were, I've got a biography coming in right now. Nathan Bedford and preachers that operated in the Civil War. They were in the Civil War. C.I. Scofield and other, things like that.
Mhm.
So, and then there are some that don't. What has been the traditional? It doesn't seem like. Let me say it like this. It only seems recently that we have checked out. It seems like traditionally it has been on the spectrum of how much we're involved. But only recently has it been an acceptable thing to go, no, we're just going to check out because the whole thing's going to hell in a handbasket.
Right. Well, we've been given such an amazing opportunity living in the United States of America, an opportunity that many people throughout history have never enjoyed. And that is the opportunity to have some involvement in our political system. I'm not under a monarchy. I don't have to submit to an oligarch. I have the ability to have a voice. So it's a shame that when Christians decide to check out, it's when we have more opportunity than ever.
Right,
Um,
right.
Now, historically, those who were getting their footing, realizing liberty and the voice that they had, especially Baptist peoples, they were very involved. John Leland, now he would have opposed things like days of prayer because he felt like it was promoting a certain religion.
Mm-hmm.
He opposed the post office being closed on Sunday. He said, "Well, why
Yeah.
isn't it closed on Saturday for the Jews then?" Yeah,
Uh-huh.
so that was his perspective, but nonetheless, he was still very politically involved in the sense of going to James Madison and being the spark for what would become the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
And so that's John Leland. Now, on the flip side, during his day, there was another Baptist preacher named John Gannot. John Gannot became George Washington's chaplain. And there's actually a picture of George Washington being baptized by John Gannot. John Gannot, in opposition to Leland's perspective on days of prayer, was invited to lead the first day of prayer by
Mm.
George Washington, and he accepted. He did it.
Uh-huh.
But all that to say this, they were involved in the system to an extent. For the sake of their life and liberty, they had to be, because Baptists were
Right,
still being persecuted at that time.
right, right.
Um, that's probably a reason it's a little bit easier to shrug it off now.
Mm. I wonder if, because what we're seeing is a huge swing, and I'm actually researching, and I hate when I hear people talking about things they just don't understand. But I'm actually researching and reading the original works of some of these. Wolf has a book out on Christian nationalism. He's a proponent of it. I'm in the process of reading his book right now. I want to know what they say themselves, not what somebody on YouTube says about them. But is there a difference, obviously, in a Christian nationalist? But is there room to be a Christian and a nationalist, and to have Christian ethics inform our national perspective?
Yes, and I think again we've been given to a degree that opportunity. I would encourage people to vote their values. Um, why give up when we've been given the opportunity to do so? I would
Mm-hmm.
encourage believers. If you can take a government office, do so, but it has to be with the underlying idea. We're not bringing in the kingdom. We're not creating a theocracy, and that was
Mm-hmm.
some of the dangers of what did happen in the past. I have a sermon I preach called "The Dangers of a Christian Nation,"
Mm.
because historically Christian nations have done some of the most unchristian things.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
Zwingli, when he rose to power in the Reformation, he was a huge advocate for killing Baptists. Um, so that's a pretty unchristian thing, but he would have considered what he ran to be somewhat of a theocracy or a Christian nation.
Yeah.
We have a secular government, but for it to be informed with values and morality, if a government is doing what God ordained it to do, according to Romans 13, it is not going to be a terror to good works. It's actually going to be the minister of good for God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people will bring those things up and they'll say, submit yourselves. I'm thinking that's over in First Peter, in the book of First Peter. I'm trying to get to it real quick. Oh, we just lost him. Okay, so it says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be the king as supreme or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. I've often thought about, guys will bring that up, especially back in the day in 2020, but which government are you talking about there? We are to submit ourselves. Would you submit yourselves to Karl Marx? Would you submit yourselves to Adolf Hitler? What are the governments that you would submit yourself to? Of course, Francis Schaeffer talked about the fact that, you have to be able to rebel against the government. Otherwise, the government becomes the supreme authority in your life. Rebellion has to be an option for a Christian at some point. Now, obviously, we're not talking about rebellion against these right now, but we are talking about Christians being involved in the political process. And I think it's not, I want to say not political as much as the cultural process. We don't necessarily have to Christianize the culture, but the more open the culture is to Christianity and the more open it is grounded upon the fundamentals of Christianity, the simple fear of God, it seems to me the better it would be. So, yeah, as I said, I don't necessarily think that Christians need to Christianize the culture, but I think a culture more open to Christianity is more beneficial. I mean, it just makes common sense. And the more we can be salt, we can be light. I think that that's not a bad thing for a dispensationalist to go, yes, Jesus could come tomorrow. I need to win as many people to the Lord as possible. However, my grandchildren might be still waiting for the return of the Lord. And I don't want my grandchildren to have to live their Christianity in communist China. If I can be involved somehow in the culture now, make a difference for the cause of Christ without having to throw away my Christianity and fundamentals, it's not an either or, it's a both and. Sort of give us the last word on this, Brother Randy, as far as where we are. We're definitely going to circle back around, but give us sort of the last word on this from your perspective.
Sure. Well, the Apostle Paul exhorts us to pray for those in authority. And the reason why we do that is so that we can enjoy peace and live in a godly, quiet life. And ultimately, as believers, that's what we want. We want peace and quiet and to live godly in this world that we're living in. We do have a little bit more of an opportunity to influence that. The last thing I want to mention as we're just leaving off with the idea of, we mentioned dialectical discernment, we need dialectical dispensationalism. And essentially that's being able to look at a passage like Luke 19, where the master goes away, but leaves us with the command to occupy. That's where we are right now. Whether times are good, whether they're bad, we have a responsible to occupy, meaning to be about the business of our Lord with his message, his gospel. And that's why we want freedom. That's why we want peace. That's why we want
Right.
a quiet life, so that we can have.
Well, you're exactly right. Occupy till he comes and be about the business. And here's what I would say. I think that there's a danger in narrowing the work of the gospel. And I know I'm going to get a lot of blowback from this, but I think that when we narrow the gospel and simply say all we should do is just get people saved, quote unquote, that really, really, really narrows the gospel. I believe the gospel answers to every facet of life. We don't just get people saved. The gospel answers to marriage. It answers to gender identity. It answers to sexuality. It answers to morality. It has an answer for taxes, freedom, self-defense. The gospel is is light. And the more light we have in our culture, the better that it is going to be. And I think history has proven that. So a great discussion that we've had. Those of you that are watching this episode will never know how much the powers of darkness have fought for us. We've had one difficulty after another, but Brother Randy has been so gracious. I want to encourage you to make sure to check out his books on Amazon. Randy Keener, make sure you get his books there. And then also I want you to check out the Asheville Baptist Institute, a great opportunity for young people of all ages to be able to get in there now more than ever and get involved. And of course, just a great time having him on. We're going to circle back around to this. I don't think this is going away. I think this is a discussion we're going to be having for a long time to come, especially with the younger generation. So we are living the conspiracy. It's here. Nationalism, Christian nationalism, what does it mean? Dialectical dispensationalism, detached dispensationalism. We have to find the proper balance, and it starts by having the proper conversations. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy it. Make sure to check out The Soul Trap and reach out to us anytime.
Surely I'll go quickly.